The reason why you want a decentralized database is the same reason why you want a decentralized currency. It allows you to transfer trust. If you think of any digital service, whether that be Twitter, the software we're recording this on right now, you can generally think of it as just different layers of abstraction and optimization around databases. And so with the decentralized database, we can build services where you give an absolute guaranteed right to be able to use the platform. Some of the biggest controversies in DePIN have been around gamification of rewards or unfair distribution of rewards. One reason is that the reward calculation happens in a black box. And so one of the great things about a decentralized database is that everybody can see how rewards were calculated. Being able to guarantee functionality to someone on a platform allows you to easier bootstrap network effects.
Welcome to We Are DePIN, a podcast dedicated to the world of DePIN projects. Every episode, we invite amazing DePIN projects to explain how they're revolutionizing and shaping the future of DePIN and Web3. Our goal is to keep you informed about everything happening in the DePIN space. This podcast is brought to you by Minima, the real-world blockchain. Minima is a device-agnostic and fully decentralized Layer 1 blockchain. It has a lightweight architecture that enables a full node to run on any mobile or IoT device, making it exceptionally adaptable for scaling decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Minima's technology is now supported by an expansive and engaged community of over 50,000 node operators. Join us for the next insightful discussion.
Hey, Brennan, how you doing?
Hey, Sino, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
No, my absolute pleasure. It's we met your co-founder in Singapore when they were at our side event. We had a side event in Singapore for Token 24/9. Minima, we had a partnership with Race Labs, and we did like a premiere we did a film. It's a pretty good event. A lot of DePIN partners were there as well. Stream was one of our partners. So yeah, it was an exciting event, and that's how I guess we got connected, and now you're on our podcast, which is exciting. So I would love to jump in straight away, if you don't mind, about yourself and Kwil. So how did the ideas start?
Yeah, so Kwil is a decentralized database, but it actually started as something a bit different. So I started working on Kwil when I was in college. This was, I guess, 4 years ago at this point, or 3 years, 11 months ago. And I'm very libertarian and I'm very idealistic. And so I was trying to build a platform where you could guarantee someone's right to free speech on the internet. So a mix of sort of like Telegram and Twitter, honestly, something sort of like what Farcaster looks like right now, but maybe focused a bit more on the free speech narrative and like less on the crypto native narrative. But in order to achieve this, I started using blockchain infrastructure because that was the best way that I could find to build an immutable communication system. And so I worked on that for about a year. So starting in late 2020 to late 2021, I was trying to build this decentralized social media. And I don't really know why I thought that would work because I hate social media. I'm like really an introvert. I'm not really that into it. I'm very libertarian. And so we're struggling to gain traction with it. And honestly, I think there were just some like more fundamental problems with what we were trying to do in the market we were targeting. But we found some really interesting technical problems when trying to build something as basic as a decentralized Twitter on blockchain infrastructure. And so that led us to essentially just ripping out the back end of that social media and making it QuilDB, or Kwil, the decentralized database. And so that was about 3 years ago. I guess a little less than 3 years ago at this point. We focused on just the database. But yeah, that's sort of like our founding story and how we got to building databases.
That's interesting. So originally, I guess maybe it wasn't called Kwil, maybe it was called something else, but the predecessor was a social fi project, right?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Wow.
Yep.
And then you discovered that there was a big problem when it came to building databases on chain, right?
Yes. So I think the problem it's funny, we actually just, like, I think literally last week put out a blog post about this. But the problems were with how we were trying to access data. And actually, like a really specific example, it was with follower data on the social platform. So in order, it was really easy to have an account and to follow other accounts and to query those into your feed. Where it was impossible, and if you'd like, we can go down the rabbit hole of like why this is such a hard, like algorithmic thing to do on chain. But where it was really hard was figuring out who follows you. You couldn't look at an account and see, oh, they have this many followers. Because of the way that data is stored, either we were building it on Arweave, which is a permanent data storage blockchain. But if you were to build it on an EVM chain like Ethereum, you're going to run into the exact same thing. We have a whole blog post about this, so I won't go into this. But yes, it was querying who followed you that was so ridiculously hard that we're like, all right, we need to start building our own custom indexes. And then you start building a couple other things on there. You start building some bundling. You can sort of think of like an L2 before L2 is really a term people were throwing around that often. But yeah, you go through 10 iterations of that, and all of a sudden you built your own database. And so yeah, that was sort of how we got there.
That's really interesting. So I didn't think that was actually the birth of Kwil as we know it. That's really interesting. So at what point did you decide to pivot into, I guess, a decentralized database network?
Yeah. So we were struggling to gain traction with the social media. And I think there were really two reasons for that. One, I don't like social media. Like I'm an introvert. I'm an engineer at heart. And I was building it with a very ideological bend. And it's just very hard to build a business on that. Very hard to build a business on that. And then just the second one is that I think ideological technologies, and it's sort of ironic that I'm saying this because Web3 is a very ideological technology, but I think it's just very hard to scale those into businesses. So a mix of lack of personal desire and like personal interest in the space, as well as the fact that it was purely targeted at being ideological, it made it really hard to take the social media to the next step of being a successful business. But I am an engineer at heart and I love building things. I've always loved building things. And so problems faced by other people building things is something that I'm very passionate about. And I love working on, and I love spending all day on. And furthermore, databases are, decentralization is ideological, but databases are extremely pragmatic. They're a huge industry. In fact, I believe they're the largest single software sector. Because every digital business, every online business is built around a database. And so we felt that was a much better market to go and build a business on. There's still the ideological bent of decentralization and the ideological component, but it's also very pragmatic in this huge business opportunity. And so we just, from the perspective of trying to build a business, we felt that was a better route to take.
Yeah. It might sound like a very basic question, Brennan, but decentralized databases versus the normal databases that we have right now, what are the benefits, I guess, or maybe the flip side of things? What are the problems that exist with existing databases that a decentralized solution can solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I will actually start with the ideological angle here, because I think that is what will make the most sense to Web3 native users who I believe are probably most of the audience of this podcast. So the reason why you want a decentralized database is the same reason why you want a decentralized currency, right? Like, why is Bitcoin better than Cole's Cash? Well, nobody's ever used Cole's Cash as a serious means of exchange outside of Kohl's. And I guess for those who don't know, Kohl's, it's a department store, and they have like a reward system called Cole's Cash. But the reason Bitcoin's better than Cole's Cash is because there's no single owner of it. There's no single entity that has godlike controls over the system and can control how much supply there is. They can't just transfer it from you. With Bitcoin, you have a cryptographic guarantee to the funds that you have, and that you are able to spend those, and nobody can really take that away from you. And so it's the exact same thing for a database. If you think of any digital service, whether that be Twitter, whether that be the software we're recording this on right now, Riverside FM, whether that be Google, you can generally think of it as just different layers of abstraction and maybe optimization around databases that are querying data. And so with the decentralized database, we can build services where you give an absolute guarantee of human rights to your users. With us, it started as a guaranteed right to free speech, but really it's a guaranteed right to be able to use the platform. And so that's the ideological bend. And that's, I think will make sense to a lot of people in Web3. Where it gets really interesting is why that's valuable. We started with free speech, but especially in DePIN, there are some really interesting use cases where being able to guarantee functionality to someone on a platform allows you to easier bootstrap network effects, right? So let's say you're starting a new DePIN network and you need people to invest a lot of resources into buying devices and setting up the infrastructure and running them. They are going to be operating at a loss. They are going to be paying a lot of money to set that up before they profit from that. And so if you can give them a guarantee that you cannot rug pull them, that you cannot change the mechanisms of the game, then it's actually much easier to recruit people to become an early part of a network. And so, yeah, that's sort of like the more practical use case for why guaranteeing user rights on the internet is useful to building businesses. But yeah, that's sort of like the not so short answer of why a decentralized database over a centralized database.
The reasons you gave, so it's like, I guess there's the libertarian sort of standpoint, but then there's also, I guess, the transparency as well. So like, I'm trying to think in terms of like value for either the company or the end user here. And those sound like amazing benefits, but then I'm thinking, would it be more relevant for a Web3 company, which, a decentralized company, or would a decentralized database also provide value for a Web2 company? Because the reason why I'm asking is because Web2 companies make up the majority of the world, firstly, but then secondly, a lot of Web2 companies are basically Web2 companies in disguise. Like Coinbase, for instance, like, they're not really a Web3 company, but they're the largest Web3 company in existence. So that's why I asked the question. Like, do you have to be a decentralized company in order to benefit from this?
The short answer is no. Now, I think our product, and when we think of our product packaging, our offerings, who it's geared for, how we write our documentation, how we present ourselves, it really is focused at like Web3 companies, mostly Web3 startups. And I can get into why, like the business philosophy as to why we do it that way. But just to answer your question, no, it's not. I'm trying to think of where, I don't remember where I heard this. I heard this like right when I was getting into Web3, but a great way to think about Web3 is that it allows you to transfer trust over the internet, right? Web2, you can transfer information. Web3, you can transfer trust. And so any business that can benefit from being able to transfer trust over the internet has something to gain from Web3 technologies. And so that does not necessarily have to be some like a Web3 startup or a DePIN project. But I think that's where we find a very high concentration of people that are innovating on what trust mitigation unlocks for businesses. And so that's definitely where we focus on. But there are certainly use cases that extend far, far beyond it.
That's really interesting. I want to ask you in terms of, because like things if it's on chain, decentralized is on chain is more transparent than if it was hidden, right? Now you've got things like data privacy and stuff like that. I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but for people who maybe are new to hearing about Kwil, like, are there problems that arise with data privacy in going to a more of a decentralized database solution?
Yes and no. So like, yes, from the very basic perspective of if you have a public blockchain and you put something on chain, then everybody can see it, right? Obviously that violates some, for some applications, that is an unsustainable, like privacy policy. You can't have everything be totally public. But what's really interesting about Kwil is that one of the main use cases that Kwil has been used for is for a reusable KYC platform, which is obviously super private information that you cannot have be used publicly. And so this gets to sort of what Kwil does, what it means for something to be on chain, and like how Kwil is used. But I guess the best way to think about Kwil is that it's almost like you can launch your own blockchain using Kwil. And people don't think of it this way, and they don't really use it this way, and it's not why people use it. But Kwil, it's a database where all the data going into the database first gets put onto a blockchain. But it's up to the user where they actually run that blockchain, right? So you can run a public blockchain, and we actually have a public Kwil testnet, and there are a few other public Kwil networks. that work just like any other blockchain, but they manage data with a SQL database. But there are also a lot of other people that use it for what are called consortium networks. And so a consortium network is where you might have a group of 5, 10, 20 companies, and the blockchain is run amongst them, but it's not a public blockchain. And we have actually found a lot of use cases in that angle where data privacy is of concern, where you can't just have everything be totally public. And so that's sort of how we think about it. I think like the general mental model is with Kwil, you can achieve a similar level of data privacy that you can with a centralized database. There just are some trade-offs that you get for the benefits of why you use a decentralized database, depending on how much privacy you need.
Interesting. And how do you guys differ from like other decentralized database solutions, like I don't know, like the Graph and like other guys like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I really try to split it into like I guess like three different buckets. So one of them is what you mentioned, the Graph, right? The Graph, all the Graph does is it indexes on-chain data and it provides a convenient way for you to query that data, right? And so that is like is very useful. But Kwil is more of a platform to store data. So you're building an application and you need to find a place to store your data. You can't go and store your own data on the Graph. You can tell it to go and index a blockchain in a certain way, but you can't store your own data. So that's like the kind of the first sector. The second sector of decentralized database is actually just a blockchain. So a blockchain is a database. It's a very fancy type of distributed database that gives trust guarantees. And that's actually probably the thing that Kwil is closest to. Like technically at its core, Kwil is running a blockchain. People use it for different things. But a blockchain is just a distributed database where you can build rules around who can write to the database and how they can write to it, and who owns it, or like usually no central person owns it. But so blockchains, I sort of categorize those as like the second decentralized database. And those are the ones that are most similar to Kwil. And then the third one is more of like a decentralized data storage platform. And so maybe you can think of this sort of like Filecoin, where it doesn't necessarily have the same properties as a blockchain, but it is better at some use cases regarding like high scale and low cost, but at the trade-off with a few other trade-offs that I can go into if you'd like, but it might be a bit too deep for this conversation. But so we sort of break them down into 3 different buckets, and we very much think of Kwil in the blockchain bucket. It's not a public blockchain, but the way it works and the properties of it are very similar to that of a public blockchain.
And let's talk about the applicability in the DePIN sector. So how does decentralized database solutions such as yourselves, Kwil, apply with DePIN providers and DePIN companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll sort of skip past the ideological bend here because I think that one's pretty obvious, and I'll sort of narrow in on like a very practical use case that decentralized databases have for DePINs. And I guess just to be super clear, internally, I know that DePIN's a pretty broad term, and it's taken on it's a very broad term that encapsulates a lot of projects. Internally, we often try to think about DePINs as IoT, like token incentivized, decentralized IoT devices. That's at least how we think of it internally. And so when we think of the value prop regarding a decentralized database for decentralized IoT, a lot of it comes down to rewards. So some of the biggest controversies in decentralized IoT have been around gamification of rewards or unfair distribution of rewards. And there are a couple reasons as to why that happens. But one reason is that the reward calculation happens in a black box, right? Like take a points program. A lot of points programs, you earn points, but then the actual token distribution based on the points you have is not necessarily one-to-one. There are all these arbitrary calculations, sometimes, for good reasons, sometimes maybe not for good reasons, that happen that cause a massive betrayal of user trust. So one of the great things about a decentralized database is that everybody can see how rewards were calculated. It's sort of this off-chain, at least like not on the main chain, it is its own chain, but it's this off-chain data store where you can store all of your raw data, all of the inputs for parameters for how rewards are calculated. And you can have an open and fair process for how those rewards get calculated and then get put on chain and released to people to claim. And so the reason it's so valuable to DePIN projects is sort of for that, the original reason that I was talking about earlier in the podcast, because it allows them to easier bootstrap network effects. Because people don't have to trust them, they know that they're not going to get screwed over because they can see the incentive mechanisms operating in public. And so that's really the main use case we have found within DePIN and decentralized IoT. Or decentralized database.
I think that's an amazing use case though, because a lot of these DePIN companies are promising, huge payouts to, depending on their business model, to individuals or to businesses. And, you can't just trust them on face value. I think the amazing thing that Web3 provides is you can build trustless solutions. And so if you can actually see the previous payouts, to other companies or individuals, you can see you coming in and interacting with that DePIN company, how much you're likely to be rewarded as a result. And yeah, I can definitely see the use case there, because the alternative is you kind of just have to get involved, spend your time and often a lot of times money as well, getting involved in the DePIN project and perhaps not being paid as fairly as you would want. So it puts more responsibility on the DePIN project to be transparent with their marketing and sort of saying, this is how much you expect to be paid. If you don't believe us, like, this is all the on-chain data that you can see. It's all publicly available. And that's where someone like Kwil would come in. So I could definitely see the use case there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other part of it, part of it is holding a DePIN project to be accountable, right? To have a fair reward system. But the other is to have a traceable history of why, when, and how certain decisions were made, right? Like sometimes there is a great reason for a DePIN project to retain some amount of centralized control over the reward distribution process. Such as if they found out that there's some issue in their incentive mechanisms and somebody has gamed it and they don't want to emit a ton of rewards to the people that gamed it. And so I think how we really think about it is a database that allows you to build governance mechanisms, whatever those may be, right? If that means that you retain some amount of control, that's okay. I think the important thing is that everybody knows what the rules are before they get involved, right? Because a lot of these betrayals of trust, people get involved in a DePIN project under one assumption, they start trying to earn rewards, and then the game changes from them because they didn't understand what the rules were and who controlled it. And so being able to be upfront about that and show that, okay, maybe this centralized actor, the founding team, they had to make a change to the reward distribution protocol because they found some issue with the incentive mechanism. That's okay. And I think actually that's really common. I just think being able to show that was why a certain decision was made and people can then go and calculate rewards based on that decision, it really helps with being able to build that trust component and onboard early users, even if it does mean that you retain an amount of centralized control, especially in the early days of a project. Does that make sense?
I can certainly see that. Yeah, for sure. Brennan, we're sort of getting to the end of the podcast, but I really want to get an understanding of where you guys are at currently as a business in terms of adoption, community, and everything.
Yeah. So we, as a business, we have, I guess we sort of think about our business in terms of like the three sectors we are most involved in, that we see the most usage in of our product. So the first one is oracles. I think like the biggest use case right now of our business is oracles. The second one is identity, and then the third one is DePIN. And those last two are probably pretty close to each other. Like they're probably pretty neck and neck. But so everyone's goal right now as a relatively early stage crypto company is find product market fit. Right. That's the really hard thing in this space. And so we sort of measure our current stage as a company in terms of where we are in our journey to finding product market fit. And so really what that means is how well we are able to push into all of or one of these sectors that I just mentioned, and being able to provide serious value for them. And so we have some pretty mature use cases in each that I'm really happy about and I'm really excited about. And really our goal and where we're trying to get to over the next year and a half is really hone in on a set of mature use cases for a single sector, right? So across each of those three sectors I mentioned, we have some really interesting individual mature use cases, but we're really trying to build those out more with some more partners. And so we're sort of at that stage where we have seen the early adoption, we're seeing the beachhead market start to form, but we are yet to capture, in the majority, a single beachhead market, which is, sort of like the first necessary step to reaching product market fit. And so that's sort of how we think about our business and our growth and our trajectory, and where we're trying to get to. But iterating towards product market fit. That's kind of the game that everybody's playing right now. And we're excited about the progress we've made on it. And we're really excited about the prospects we have, especially in the DePIN space, in achieving that. That's really how we think about our business.
Absolutely amazing. Okay, Brennan, we're going to wrap up the podcast fairly soon, but I want to ask you a question I like to ask all my guests before we wrap up the podcast. And that is, what is your favorite use case of DePIN outside of what you guys are immediately doing?
Yeah. So I think my favorite, this is going to sound really vague, but I can give like some tangible examples. But my favorite use case of DePIN are projects that are using their own token to incentivize early adoption such that they can build a business model that would not be possible otherwise. Right. And so I think like the reason I find this so compelling is because it's a very pragmatic use case for decentralization and for tokens. Right, like I'm sure you've been in the space for a while, and anyone that's been in the space for a while, we've sort of gone through several cycles of when are we going to get mass adoption? When are people going to start onboarding to this? When are we going to start seeing this? And by and large, it hasn't really happened yet. And so part of that is because crypto has been a very ideological technology, a very ideological industry. And there are a lot of DePIN projects that are using tokens, not because they're ideologically aligned, but because it allows them to build a business model that they cannot do with just dollars, right? And so to me, that is extremely compelling because that shows that this is how we reach mass adoption. It's a very pragmatic use case for tokens. There's no ideology needed. You don't need to be ideological. You don't need to believe in the religion. It's just really straightforward, cut and dry, why you can build a new business with this that you couldn't before. Because I really think that will be what unlocks this industry and what brings it to the masses. And so there are some really interesting DePIN and like specifically like decentralized IoT related projects that are doing this. Helium is the OG, right? This is like kind of how Helium started. But I guess for like some newer ones that are up and coming, and I think you've actually probably had some on the podcast. But there's a project called PowerPod. They're building decentralized electric vehicle chargers. And data from electric vehicle chargers, it's really, really valuable to be able to know where would be an economically viable place to build more vehicle chargers. And so they're using DePIN and token incentives to bootstrap an early network of chargers so that they can build a valuable data set and sell that as their business, right? So really cut and dry why that's valuable, really cut and dry why token incentives allow you to do this like in a more cost-effective way than just using dollars. And so projects like that are really exciting to me just because it's a very straightforward use case for why it's a great business. And there's not a huge ideological bent to it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that is a good step to getting mass adoption is people are interacting with these services without even knowing sort of like what's happening behind the scenes. Minima is very like heavily involved in the EV charging space as well. And it shows that people can use this at mass scale. And EV is a very good example because a large bottleneck of why EV's not had mass adoption is because of the charging infrastructure. And DePIN could be one of the things that really unlocks. It's quite ironic because EV could be the thing that unlocks DePIN to have mass adoption, but then DePIN could be the thing that unlocks mass adoption of EV as well. So yeah, I think it's a very, I agree. Like, I quite like that, the decentralized charging infrastructure point is a good one. Okay, thank you so much, Brennan, for coming on the podcast. I want to wrap up by basically asking, how can people stay in touch with you and Kwil going forward?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to stay in touch is probably on Twitter. So our Twitter is Kwil Team, KWIL Team. Or my personal Twitter, Brennan_Lamey. Or you can find any of that on our website, which is just kwil.com, kwil.com. Yeah, those are probably the best ways to stay in touch with Kwil and what we're doing in the DePIN space.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brennan, for coming on again. And we'll chat very soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion, brought to you by Minima, the real-world blockchain. The only layer 1 blockchain lean and compact enough to run in full on any mobile or IoT device. If you're new to DePIN, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter to stay up to date. Thank you so much again. We'll catch you in the next episode.